Even if you are listening to this while doing something else, perhaps something inside you has paused. A change is happening, not outside, not in time. It is silent, and precisely because of that, it goes unnoticed by almost everyone. You may have felt tired without a clear cause, a strange desire to step away from what once made sense, a subtle perception that insisting no longer feels right. This is not confusion, it is reorganization. What is organizing itself now did not come to accelerate your life, it came to sustain it. 2026 does not begin when the calendar turns, it begins when something inside you stops resisting. Stay with me for a moment, because what is forming in silence will sustain everything that has not yet appeared. There is a kind of tiredness that does not come from the body. Even after sleeping, it remains. Even after resting, it is still there. You may have learned to live with it, to function despite it, to keep going without questioning too much. But this tiredness is not weakness, it is saturation. It is the sign that you carried more than you should have, for longer than was fair. And even if your mind drifted for a few seconds, come back with me, because this weight did not appear to stop you, it appeared to redirect you. For a while, you believed it was just another phase, another cycle to be crossed, one more effort before things got better. But something began to bother you. The same emotions returning, the same patterns with different names. You may even have thought the problem was you, that maybe you needed more discipline, more faith, more strength. But quietly, another perception emerged. It was not about insisting, it was about closing. Even if you do not know exactly what, something has already begun to say goodbye. There were periods when nothing moved forward, no clear answers, no external confirmation, only silence. And silence is uncomfortable when the mind wants control, when it wants to predict, when it wants guarantees. You may have felt invisible, or forgotten, or out of sync with time. But that silence was not empty, it was space. While you waited for external signs, something internal was being reorganized with precision, without noise, without announcement, without urgency. Perhaps now you can see it. The silence did not delay you, it aligned you. Things began to lose meaning. People, ideas, plans that once felt non-negotiable. It was not a conscious decision, it was a natural distancing, as if something in you could no longer sustain what no longer matched who you were becoming. And that brought guilt, doubt, a strange feeling of changing too much. But you were not losing yourself, you were grounding yourself. Not everything that leaves is a loss. Some departures are space. Maybe you still can't explain it, but there is a different steadiness now. Less hurry, less anxiety, less need to prove anything. It is not full clarity yet. It is not visible expansion yet. It is foundation. Like something being placed beneath the surface of your life, something that does not draw attention now, but will sustain later. Even if you can't see it, what is organizing itself in silence is not small. After some things left, a space remained. An emptiness is frightening because the mind tries to fill it quickly, with distraction, with haste, with anything that restores a sense of control. But this emptiness did not come to be filled, it came to be felt. It is within it that reorganization happens. It is within it that excess dissolves. You may have tried to escape this space. You may have kept yourself busier, spoken more, fought more. And even so, the emptiness remained. Not every emptiness is lack. Some are preparation. Even surrounded by people, you may have felt alone. Not from abandonment, but because something in you no longer fit the same conversations, the same interests, the same urgencies. It is a quiet loneliness, hard to explain, easy to feel. And perhaps you wondered if you were becoming cold, or distant, or too strange. But this loneliness is not closure, it is transition. Some paths require inner silence before they require movement. At certain moments, memories surfaced out of nowhere. Old situations, past choices, versions of yourself you thought you had already left behind. And along with them came questions. What if it had been different? What if I had understood sooner? But these memories did not return to trap you. They returned to close cycles. When something can be revisited without intense pain, it is because it has already lost its power. Perhaps now you can see it. The past was not calling you. It was saying goodbye. There was a moment when silence changed its feeling. Before, it tightened. Now, it sustains. You began to need less stimulation, less validation, less noise. Not from disinterest in life, but from respect for what was happening inside you. And this is subtle, almost invisible to those looking from the outside, but deeply transformative. When silence no longer bothers you, it is because something has found its place. In the midst of all this, a perception began to emerge, still fragile, still without clear form, but present. The feeling that you no longer needed to force things, that insisting was not the same as moving forward, that something greater organizes itself better when you do not interfere. This was not a logical conclusion, it was a felt knowing. Even if you cannot explain it, this small opening of awareness is the beginning of a silent turning point. At some point, without announcement, without a formal decision, the mind grew tired of fighting. It was not giving up, it was exhaustion from conflict. You realized that overthinking was not resolving anything, it was only keeping everything suspended. And then, something slowed down. Thoughts still came, but they no longer dominated. They passed, and you remained. This is a rare shift, when the mind stops competing for control. You did not lose ambition, you lost noise. And in the silence that remained, something began to align. You may have noticed less inner dialogue, fewer justifications, fewer imagined scenarios. This is not apathy, it is presence. And when the mind stops fighting, life begins to cooperate. That cooperation makes no noise, it simply organizes. You are still living in the same world, but time changed its texture. Before, it pressed, now it accompanies. You stopped running without even realizing you had stopped. And curiously, things began to fit together more easily. Less internal delay, less emotional urgency. Not because everything was resolved, but because you stopped resisting the process. Time stopped being an enemy and became a silent ally. When hurry leaves, clarity enters. You began to wait without anxiety, to decide without guilt, to act without desperation. And this completely changes the kind of reality that forms ahead. Time is not testing you, it is walking with you. There was a recent choice that you made differently, without telling anyone, without justifying, without explaining. It may not have seemed important, but it was, because it was not born from fear, nor from lack, nor from pressure. It was born from clarity. And when a decision comes from that place, it does not weigh you down. It sustains itself. You did not feel euphoria, you felt steadiness. That is the difference. Aligned decisions do not shout victory, they simply remain. That may have been the first of many, and even if you do not know it yet, it has already reorganized paths. The movement has begun. Something changed in the way you show up in the world. Less need to convince, less urgency to be seen, less fear of being misunderstood. You realized that those who need to understand do, and those who do not no longer require your energy. This frees space, inner space, emotional space, mental space. When life stops demanding proof, it begins to offer fit. Opportunities no longer come through insistence, they appear through compatibility. And that changes everything. Quietly, your relationship with money began to change. Not because it arrived suddenly, but because fear left. Less anxiety, fewer impulsive decisions, less need to prove worth. You began to sustain better what comes in, and that is maturity. Money does not respond to hurry, it responds to structure. You may not see large numbers yet, but you notice something more important: consistency. And consistency sustains. What grows now does not slip through your fingers. You began to realize that stability is not the absence of problems. It is the presence of a base. Even when something shakes, you do not shake with it. Even when doubt appears, it does not take over. This steadiness is not rigidity, it is rootedness. You no longer react to everything. You choose. And that saves energy, emotional, mental, financial. Stability arrived first on the inside. Everything else follows. Thinking about the future no longer tightens your chest like before. Not because you have all the answers, but because you trust your own foundation more. You know you will not accept just anything, that you will not remain where it makes no sense, that you will not lose yourself in order to belong. The future stopped being a threat. It became continuity, and that is rare. You are not waiting to be saved. You are prepared to sustain. You began to notice that some things arrive without struggle. Right conversations, clear ideas, compatible opportunities. This is not luck. It is not coincidence. It is alignment. When inside and outside speak the same language, the path opens quietly. You do not need to chase. You need to remain aligned. And that is what you are already doing. 2026 does not appear as a promise. It appears as a logical sequence. Nothing suddenly grand, nothing forced, just continuity of what has already been well structured. What changes is not the year, it is the way you sustain life, and that you have already changed. Look inward, even without clear images. Notice the space, the steadiness, the absence of desperation. This was not born yesterday. It was built, quietly, patiently. What has organized itself now will sustain everything that comes, without hurry, without noise, without collapse, only permanence. At some point, without announcement, life begins to respond. Not with explosions, not with dramatic changes, but with small alignments. Things that once felt stuck now flow with less resistance. You notice it and almost find it strange because you were used to struggling. These responses do not ask for celebration. They ask for presence. They are quiet signs that something is working. Even if your mind tries to minimize them, stay with me. Nothing here is random. It is coherence. Life responds when it finds structure. You are not being tested now. You are being accompanied. Quietly, money loses its emotional weight. Not because it suddenly became abundant, but because it stopped being a threat. You no longer react from fear. You choose. And that changes everything. Decisions become cleaner, spending more conscious, income more consistent. Money begins to circulate where there was once blockage, because now there is maturity to sustain it. It is not about quantity. It is about relationship. What comes in now does not destabilize you. It fits. You no longer feel the need to compare. Other people's lives have lost their grip on you, not from indifference, but from alignment. You know where you are, and that is enough. This confidence does not shout. It does not display itself. It does not need proof. It remains. Even on ordinary days, even on cloudy days. Trusting your own path is a rare state, and you arrived there without noticing. There are no fireworks. There is no abrupt turn. The new cycle is already happening. As you live, as you breathe, as you sustain what has changed inside. You do not need to tell anyone. You do not need validation. The cycle confirms itself by the peace it brings, by the steadiness, by the absence of urgency. What is real does not need explanation. It sustains itself. Now, remain here for a moment, without trying to understand, without trying to predict, simply sensing the space that has formed. What needed to fall, fell. What needed adjustment, adjusted. Nothing was lost. Nothing was wasted. 2026 is not a leap. It is continuation of what was organized in silence, of what was structured from within. Remain for a few moments in this state, without expectation, without anxiety, only presence, and allow life to respond as a natural consequence. What part touched you? What within you is ready to be reborn now?